I think in a lot of cases, a lot of important things would never happen if any of us realised how much was going to be involved in making them happen. 3/4 of Auckland Transport's ferry services create more emissions than the car journeys they displace. So if emissions was still the target, you would be better to cancel 3/4 of Auckland Transport's ferry routes. We're protected by our own naivety at times and enabled by our own naivety because affecting big change is really hard and takes a long time and is actually really risky. Anybody that started a business, I suspect, has much more respect for those whose businesses have failed than the rest of the public because it's a close run thing at times. It's not easy. I painted a picture of this future that I was aiming for and I showed that future to everybody. In the process, everybody could see what their role in it was.
Kia ora, welcome back to Care Beyond Profits. I'm Azura Ali. In this interview, I am thrilled to be joined by Michael Eaglen. He's the founder and CEO of EV Maritime. This is New Zealand's company behind the first ever urban electric ferries in Auckland. He's a naval architect and a former CEO of McMullen and Wing. He's been sailing since he was 7 years old and he didn't draw a salary for a year and a half in his business. Michael shares his experience on naivety in business, and if you've ever wondered what it takes to truly build a meaningful business and stick to your values during hard times such as COVID, this one is for you. If you enjoy this episode of Care Beyond Profits, please like, share, and subscribe below. It's free to do, and honestly, I appreciate this so much. Thank you. Let's get into it. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on Care Beyond Profits today.
Thanks for having me, Azura.
Hey, I want to start off with something that I've read about you being the boat guy. So take me back to your career. How did you earn this boat guy name? And also, what was that moment when you were a kid that you actually knew this is what you're going to do?
I guess boats have been part of my life for almost all of it. I think I was never allowed a bicycle as a child. Apparently that was much too dangerous. And so instead my parents thought that I should buy a sailing dinghy. So they said if for every $1 I managed to save up doing jobs and mowing lawns, as a 7-year-old I was at the time, they would match it. And I went out with, I managed to save $100 and my parents put in $100 and I bought the cheapest, heaviest, slowest, least competitive P-class sailing dinghy and went out and learned to sail. And that was when I was about 7 or 8. And I guess I've been a sailor ever since. I sometimes say I spent enough of my time capsized upside down that the salt water leaked into my veins and then I just couldn't get it out. So I guess the time when I realized I was going to make a career out of it was probably subconsciously in my late secondary school years. New Zealand was starting to get involved in the America's Cup and we started to get a little bit more public visibility of what the marine industry could mean. And more broadly, studying engineering at the University of Auckland, I had the opportunity to attend a marine industry naval architecture and design conference that was held here. And all the big names of the yacht design world were in Auckland, and I managed to get a cheap ticket and go along to this thing as a student, and I got to meet a lot of these great names. And that was really where I decided that I wanted to focus my career on boats. And I didn't actually finish up my engineering studies at Auckland. I transferred halfway through them to go study naval architecture in Southampton in England. And so then I've come back and been in the boat design, boat engineering, boat construction, management, governance, marine industry stuff all my professional life. It's pretty much inescapable. In fact, there was a period there maybe about 10 years ago that I seriously contemplated getting out of the marine industry, and I was pretty firmly told by all the recruitment people that it was too late. I was stuck.
You're stuck. Once you're in, you're in.
So that's what I do. Yeah. So I'm a boat guy, like it a lot, but I love it.
So in your childhood, you said that your parents pretty much gave you the money and you couldn't really do much. What was their background like? What were they trying to instill in you at that point?
I think it was a couple of things. I think that neither of them had bicycles as children, and they were genuinely scared for my safety in bicycles. And both of them knew something of the water. My father had been a sailor and a sea scout, and that was something that he treasured from his own childhood. And my mother wasn't directly a sailor sailor herself, but her father had an old boat that he used to tinker with and go fishing on. And so both of them, I think, completely naively thought that sailing was a safer thing for me to do than riding a bicycle. And it turned out okay, but I wouldn't say it's a whole lot safer. But I guess we're drawn towards the things that we know. And it was, I guess, through effectively a love of the sea that my parents had, that they wanted me to have. And I think that's really where it started. And that's the great thing. I think that sailing as a competitive sport is a wonderful thing, but I think that sailing as a way to connect with the ocean environment is a whole different thing again. And I think that's really what we instill in our children, or what we aim to instill in our children when we send them out racing in small boats. And as I did with my own children.
I was just going to say, did you do that with your own children, and how's that going?
I did. They both learned to sail. They both ended up with a very deep love of the ocean. One of them became a very good competitive sailor and is currently working for New Zealand's America's Cup team. So he's in the design team. So he's I guess following a little bit of a path like me. The other one didn't really get into competitive sailing at all. He did it for a short time and wasn't into it. But he's ended up still with a love of the water and cruising and fishing, and he likes going fast on the water. So
you touched on the America's Cup boat. Now, you were CEO at the yard that actually built the boat. So that's quite a special moment for you, and obviously for all of us in New Zealand to actually witness that. Talk us a little bit about, your role there when you did it, and also just, what was that experience like?
Well, there was a few decades between McMullen and Wing doing America's Cup boats and when I was there, but it was still a very important piece, and it was very special. I mean, because those boats that McMullen and Wing had built, those early New Zealand America's Cup boats, were alongside some of the Whitbread boats that they'd built for Sir Peter Blake and people like that. They were the kind of formative boats that got me really in love with sailing from or seeing where sailing could go. And so, yes, to be kind of in the at kind of ground zero for those boats was something pretty special. But when I joined McMullen and Wing, it's a company that had been through a lot of different focuses over the years. It had done a whole lot of these race boats and time in the America's Cup. But when I joined them, they were very established in the Superyachts. And that was an area that I was very interested in at the time, and had been doing a lot of work in the super yacht field for most of my career up till that time. And we were building, in those days, very large motor yachts for wealthy people around the world. And I guess I rationalized that to my environmentalist self and my social justice self as being as a great wealth redistribution scheme. These were high value projects that we were converting millions of dollars of money from wealthy people into great craftsman jobs. And I kind of ran on that justification for a while until it sort of grew thin. Actually, I led that company out of the super yacht sector into commercial boats, and for I guess business sustainability reasons, but it also kind of brought with it deeper sustainability reasons for me personally, and getting involved in commercial boats, getting involved in ferries, and then observing the spectacular amount of fuel which is burned by ferries in urban commuter fleets really got me into looking pretty hard at whether we could do something about it. And as a naval architect, I was conscious we could do something about it through improving the efficiency of the boats, but that really we needed to also go looking for a step change in the type of fuel. Around that time, we're talking about 2017 at this point. McMullen and Wing was well established in new construction, refit and repair of commercial boats for the local commercial maritime sector. And Auckland Transport was actually kind of in the market for some more ferries. And it was all looking like they were going to build a whole lot of diesel ones. And actually, they might end up building them overseas in the developing world, because the developing world was developing and they could starting to do a pretty good job of building these diesel boats. And so I went looking for, I guess, how to bring all of these things together and how to reset what we did as an industry locally to go after stuff that's difficult again, to, I guess, reassert our claim on the industry as a local industry, rather than just doing what we'd been doing for 20 or 30 years. How do we go out and do something that's hard? Really lean into some of the areas where we could maintain a market in competition to the developing world, and then also something that would help address the wider challenges that our end customer, the councils and local government, organisations around New Zealand might be facing. And of course, at that time, we were very focused on climate change and transport emissions, and we had the Zero Carbon Act and Auckland Council Climate Action Plan, all of these things kind of flowing out. And all of these things were it seems almost surprising now, they were absolutely bipartisan policies and pieces of legislation that all parties across the House were supporting. And we had really quite a clear direction. And in that kind of environment, it really felt like the right thing to do was to go looking at whether the marine sector, and especially the commercial maritime sector, could play a role in that decarbonisation journey. So, it's sort of, we were able, I guess, to leverage the reputation that we had in McMullen and Wing, earned from those sort of early America's Cup boats, and my own reputation in design and naval architecture from well before that time, also in America's Cup and various other things, and build a really strong presentation of our credibility to be the ones to come in and lead, in this case, Auckland on its maritime electrification journey. And we were fortunate, I guess, lots of challenges along the way, but COVID came along and the government was interested in supporting, the shovel-ready infrastructure projects was a kind of a economic rescue plan, and we applied for some funding, and we were fortunate to be funded to help support Auckland Transport to launch the first 2 electric ferries for Auckland. And the rest is kind of history. That kind of got that got EV Maritime established on our path and enabled us to build a team and export markets and all the rest of it.
In terms of leaving a company from being a CEO to what you've now built, it's not an easy decision for someone to make. How did that come about, and how did then your pivot come into life?
Yeah, it is. It's a risky thing, I guess, especially with hindsight, to leave a good job and go start something new. And I started it with the owners of McMullen and Wing. So when we first started EV Maritime, it was a 3-way partnership between us, because a lot of the work that was the foundation of EV Maritime was done as a research R&D project within McMullen and Wing. So we started it together, and I was the only one actively involved in EV Maritime, but the 3 of us were on the board along with an independent chairman. But I did that. I did that at the end of 2019. I think I stood down at the beginning of November 2019. And at that stage, we were pretty well poised, actually, to sell the first 2 boats to Fuller's. And they'd lent us some money as an advance on a deposit for a future contract to help us do the final development on these boats. And, then COVID came along, and COVID wasn't very kind to Fuller's as a public transport business and a tourism business. And so the idea of them spending millions of dollars buying boats kind of went out the window. And so here I was, I'd left a good job and was running this business that had very little hope of earning any income. And, I didn't draw a salary for probably a year and a half, and was grateful that my wife also works hard and was able to support the family through that time. But after quite a long period of time, we were able to A, get the funding from central government that we could take to Auckland Transport, and B, get over the line with the contract that would allow that funding to actually flow. And in the middle of 2022, we'd signed a contract with Auckland Transport for 2 electric ferries. And so then we were okay. Well, somewhat okay. I could start drawing a salary again and get paid and see if we could really build a business. And I think at that time we had 2 staff. It was myself and one other.
And at the time that you basically created these electric ferries, there wasn't really much demand for electric ferries, wasn't it? So how did you tap into that and convince everybody that electric is the way to go? Or is it diesel, as people are now discussing right now?
Yeah, look, there was no demand at all. In fact, it was almost the other way around. I mean, we weren't really welcomed in trying to push these electric ferries on people. I mean, the capital cost was much higher, and people hadn't gone asking for that much capital before. And so I think at the time, in the early days, Auckland Transport probably pretty much just wanted to be left alone to get on and build some diesel boats. But I guess the answer is how do we change that? There's a few things. There's a whole lot of lobbying, and one of the wonderful things about COVID or the lockdown period, one of the sort of unexpected things that happened was we found we could get meetings with just about anybody. And the Prime Minister was a little bit busy doing daily updates on television, but we had meetings with ministers on Teams, and we just somehow or other just seemed to be able to reach out and see them emails and say, hey, can we have a conversation? And they said, yeah, sure. And so I spent weeks and weeks and weeks where I was having almost daily meetings with these people that in ordinary times you wouldn't have a chance of getting a conversation with. But that helped a lot. I mean, there was a lot of work done by myself and a few others in spreading the word. I learned the importance of a few key points. I guess we hear it with politicians, but I went out and I did a bunch of analysis looking at how much fuel was burned in the Auckland Transport fleet. And I found out that at the time there was about 13 million litres of diesel a year being spent on the Auckland ferry fleet. That was about 20% of the total fuel burn for the whole of the Auckland public transport system, whereas it was only about 6% of the journeys. So they were burning 3.5 times more than their fair share of diesel. So ferries were hugely energy inefficient. And that statistic, I remember figuring all of that out and finding those numbers, and that statistic really formed is a number which is still used by politicians and by Auckland Transport and so on as kind of a key justification for this rollout. There are other key numbers that we've come onto more recently, which haven't yet fallen into the public discourse, but need to. I mean, one of them is that 3/4 of Auckland Transport's ferry services create more emissions than the car journeys they displace. So if emissions was still the target, you would be better to cancel 3/4 of Auckland Transport's ferry routes, which are also very expensive. And put people back in single occupancy petrol cars to drive to work. Now, nobody is for a moment suggesting that that's a good outcome for the city, but it's quite confronting when we think of public transport as an environmental good, because when it comes to fast, long-distance ferries, it quite simply isn't an environmental good at all. So there are some very real problems. The other thing that I guess was a real turning point, and it was actually before I had stood down from McMullen and Wing, was at the end of 2018, I was invited to give a talk to a breakfast meeting that Fuller's hosted, and they were seeking to get more involved in the sort of strategic dialogue around the role of ferries in Auckland. And they put on this breakfast, invited me to speak about technology. And instead of standing up and just talking about what was coming as a dry kind of engineer, I had some inspiration from some people who have since become dear friends, but I painted a picture of this moment in time, which I actually placed around APEC when we were going to be hosting it here, where there were these two new electric ferries gliding in, and I described how this fleet was going to operate, and the role of electric boats and maybe hydrogen and some other things, and how it was all going to work. And the interesting thing was that because I'd been able to influence who was in that room, we had all the ferry operators there, we had the big gentailers there, energy gentailers there, we had sustainability people, we had council and politicians and so on. The odd thing that happened there was that everybody through that saw, it was this whole visualization thing. It's like they tell you that, if you stick a photo of your favorite Porsche on your wall and stare at it every morning and it'll become real. And I never believed any of that stuff. But this speech really taught me that maybe some of that stuff's real, because I painted a picture of this future that I was aiming for. And I showed that future to everybody. And in the process, everybody could see what their role in it was. And it almost overnight became inevitable that was what was going to happen. And if there was a moment on the journey that made this thing real, it was that one.
And the power of storytelling is very powerful, because a lot of people, especially I think technical people, and I experience this as a CFO, it always comes up because, you sit down and you're trying to talk to people that don't understand numbers, and it's always about the story. It's not about the actual numbers. It reminds me of the time of COVID, because obviously you guys you were building at a time when everyone's locked down. You're talking about ferries and electric ferries there too. But what it really makes me think about is that you didn't actually have a lot of passengers interested at that time, but you still went ahead anyway. You said that you've had 1.5 years of not getting a salary. At what point did you decide, actually, I'm in and I'm just going to keep going? Because between the time that you got the yes and you weren't getting paid, what was going through your mind at that time?
Oh, well, I mean, this is the problem, right? This is the whole sunk cost thing that they talk about, people that are gambling and they put so much money on the
Exactly.
table they can't walk away. And it's a little bit like that. It really is. And of course, I think in a lot of cases, a lot of important things would never happen if any of us realized how much was going to be involved in making them happen. I think we're protected by our own naivety at times and enabled by our own naivety because, affecting big change is really hard and takes a long time and is actually really risky. And I think that anybody that started a business, I suspect, has much more respect for those whose businesses have failed than the rest of the public because it's a close run thing at times. It's not easy. And it's tempting for us all to think that those that succeed are somehow more talented than those that don't. But I don't think it's like that at all. I think that there's a lot of hard work, but there's a lot of luck. And you have to, whether it's luck or blessing or whatever, you've got to credit there are external factors at play, and I'm very grateful for the external factors that were at play in our case. But you mentioned how we sell these boats to people, and of course, if we'd had to sell them to passengers, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, we're fortunate, I think, in our business that we know who our customers are. They're ferry operators and they're public transport authorities, and they're quite solidly grounded in their own locale. And so it enables us to understand their needs well, and the things that we did in Auckland are the things that we do everywhere in the world now. That we go looking at what the political discourse is, we go looking at the policies, and we try to kind of line things up so that we are enabling our customers or our customers' customers to deliver on those kind of long-term strategic promises, rather than just responding to some short-term procurement that might be out there. Because we've learned from experience that once these things become a procurement and hit the streets and get published, it becomes too late. So yeah, it's a long journey. We have to influence things from early on because it's a system change, but it's a rewarding one.
You've quoted Sir Peter Blake on "to finish first you must finish." How much does that hold you personally and professionally in terms of that quote and also what you live by at the moment?
I look back to my time with Team New Zealand's America's Cup Challenge, and I was on the design team part-time for the ill-fated 2002 campaign, and those words rang true because we hadn't long since Peter Blake had been involved in the early forms of Team New Zealand and the early successful ones, and then here we were, and we didn't do a good job as a team at all, and we weren't able to finish. It was a lot of great work went into that, a lot of very talented people doing a lot of really, really smart work, and yet collectively it didn't come together. And I think that the lessons in that have been really powerful for me. And Sir Peter's quote there kind of embodies that in that way. I mean, I think that it's actually one of the things that generally New Zealand is extremely well respected for, is not only doing these really clever boats or really stylish boats, but actually doing things that perform really well, really reliably. And I think that that lends itself well as an ethos to the work that we and others are doing in taking New Zealand marine industry talent into the global commercial maritime sector, because that's a direct commercial need that we lean into. And actually I'm finding that we're extremely well respected internationally for that. And so perhaps I've really been surprised, I think, at how, I don't want to say easy, but how comfortably we've been welcomed into some of our key export markets, and particularly the United States. I spend a lot of time there now, and we've got a lot of projects there as a result. But we look from little old New Zealand and look out at America as this vast market, and it's easy to be intimidated and to assume that gosh, how would we ever approach that? But it's a how do you eat an elephant moment, right? That's one bite at a time. You just break it down and you realize it's just people, and they're just businesses. And just like in New Zealand, these are ferry businesses that are very much grounded in their own local area, and we just go and understand them and go and find out what the issues are and meet the people and talk about what we're doing and do a lot of listening. And so, for all of the stories we hear about the way that when you approach America, you've got to be really shiny and on your game and have your pitch all perfect. That's just not our vibe. So we don't try to be someone we're not. We go in very, very honest and we share our stories and we listen to the customer's problem. We don't go in there telling them a whole lot about us until we know what they need. And I definitely find that, to bring it back to your question about to finish first you must finish, I think that quote from Sir Peter actually really embodies a lot about a New Zealand innovator mindset. And that's something which it's really, I find really helpful to keep reminding ourselves that is different from a lot of the rest of the world, and that is who we are, and it's part of why the world wants to do business with us.
For a lot of people, when you say going to America and from New Zealand, we always think of ourselves as a small little country, and then, all of those thought processes. And sometimes I even hear some of the businesses I work with, a lot of imposter syndrome kicks in as well when you look at America. So in your own, because I know you did a lot of traveling we were talking last year, and through all of those experiences, what are, say, 2 to 3 things you would share with someone in terms of your own journey, and how has that, now obviously we'll go into a little bit more about your future, but how has that shaped you so far?
I think, I'm not quite sure how to answer that, but I think that one of the things I've learned, not only traveling, but also back here, is, people often say the pen is mightier than the sword, and we all feel helpless at times to bring about change. And then I look at the change that we've brought about. I look at the lobbying that we did, often making ourselves a bit unpopular, speaking truth to power in Australia and trying to point out that they should be going electric. And we were, for a number of years, we were really the only voice in Australia that was calling for that. And now we see major ferry electrification projects happening in at least 3 states in Australia. And I think that I'm proud to say that we played a significant role in influencing the political discourse that way. I think, though, that's great, but it's also when you suddenly realize that the things that you say can create change, you realize that it brings a huge responsibility to make sure that you're not saying things glibly. I'm very focused in our business at making sure that the things that we lobby for are genuinely good, because it's easy to go, I think electrification sounds really cool and we can make a good business doing this electrification stuff. But, we've got to make sure that we are doing it in ways which is genuinely better for the planet. And I have real concerns about the drive for electrification in the recreational maritime sector, because the boats aren't used enough to really justify the environmental impact of the things that are being put on board. Whereas in the commercial ferries, they're burning so much diesel, they're using so much energy that in New Zealand we did the analysis, and it was only a matter of a few months before they'd gotten past, the electric boat had stepped well past its initial environmental impact and was on a if you like, a planetary win ever since. But you've got to do the work to make sure that that's true. And we've been really fortunate to be part of the Sustainable Business Network here in New Zealand for a long time. Actually, since before we were members, we felt like we were part of the family, and that's really helped us a lot to access resources and mindsets, and to keep ourselves remembering kind of the heart issues of sustainability, the core issues of sustainability within our process. Because as an engineer, it's very easy to just keeping on and just solving the technical problems, and you've got to keep yourself grounded in whether they're really right, because you can affect huge change and you can influence a whole lot of people to go in a certain direction if you find the right stories and tell them in the right forums. You better make sure they're good.
Totally. And talking of costs versus benefit, and I guess putting on my numbers hat again, it's something that always comes up in terms of, what is the ROI of what I'm investing in? So for yourself, when you were looking at electric ferry upfront costs versus diesel, what did that look like? And, 30 years down the line for an owner, what does that feel like? And where was that break-even point, I guess?
Again, we've done a lot of work on that. We commissioned some work. We commissioned PwC to do a bunch of work for us, and then later a former partner from EY expanded on that work, looking at building out some financial models to enable us to answer those questions on a kind of a generic basis, or to build some tools to enable us to answer those questions case by case. Electric boats cost a lot more at a capital level than diesel boats. The batteries, the motors, the power electronics, the automation, they're a much more modern, sophisticated thing. And you can still build a barely basic diesel boat that will do the job for many years, whereas your electric boat really is not a basic thing at all. So they're a lot more expensive to buy, but the energy costs are much lower and the maintenance costs are much lower. And so, and often they'll actually last longer. So where people often talk about, well, how long do the batteries last? And on the analysis we did for Auckland, the answer is about twice as long as the engines. So the engines are being replaced about every 5 years or 4 years, and the batteries should be lasting 8 to 10 years. We tend to kind of focus on these hot button issues and we go, oh, but the batteries don't last forever. Yeah, but nor do the engines last forever. If you look at how it maps out, of course, it depends on the cost of capital. If your capital's very high and you've got to pay for that up front, and your savings are only made in the future, then it can be quite hard to make the case for a high initial investment. If you look at it on typical kind of government spending, because that's what we're typically looking at, is local or central government investment in infrastructure, then they might be looking at 3 or 4 or 5% weighted average cost of capital, and on those sorts of bases, the net present value is quite strongly in favour of the electric boat. And the likes of Auckland Transport know that, they can see that, they've done those numbers themselves. The challenge right now for widespread adoption of electric boats is two things. Number one, they stack up best in places where they are busy. It's much harder to, your upfront capital cost is the same regardless of whether you use the boat 7 days a week or 1 day a week, right? But the amount that you save in operating it is very much not the same. So there's a big difference there. Busy boats pay themselves off much more effectively. So in some areas of the States where you have a highly seasonal demand, a lot of places up in the Great Lakes and in the Northeast, those tourist operations close completely in the winter. Alaska's the same. And so they only have a half year of, or even less at times, of season to operate. So those can be quite challenging to make the comparative economics work. The other spot in places like urban public transport, where you've got busy boats burning a lot of diesel all the time, it's really quite compelling. The other challenge is in the shoreside infrastructure. And at the moment, the fast charge infrastructure that enables you to run in a kind of a high frequency rapid transit environment is still quite expensive. And you're potentially, if you look at the Auckland example, spending about as much on two charges as you do on one ferry. And so, or in some cases, as much on one charger as you do for one ferry. So, the real focus of the industry is coming on to standardization in the charging. And if we can get from charges that cost $20 million down to charges that cost $5 million, and I think that's very achievable, and maybe it won't be 5 and it'll be 2 or 3, then that's going to really move the dial in terms of cost effectiveness. Of course, it also depends a lot what assumptions you put into your economic model. And when I say that the costs map out positive net present value compared to a diesel boat, that's true on what we used to think of as the diesel price. Look at the diesel price now, which is probably close to 3 times what it was when we did those numbers for Auckland Transport, and the argument's very much more compelling. And it's sort of we tend to look at the economics, but it's very hard to model what the future cost of diesel is going to be because unusual things can happen, and it quickly gets as well. You've got to start factoring in the risk, and most countries that we're active in now are shifting from talking about cost to talking about energy sovereignty. And so one of the great benefits of moving to electrification is that you move to an energy supply chain which is domestically produced. And that's starting to look like a really good idea in the eyes of people who are trying to make their country tick over.
Certainly a no-brainer in these economic times, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And Michael, you talked about the local economics. Now, you have just secured quite a large contract overseas, and I'm really curious, for a small New Zealand company to start off like this and then to really secure something huge, going from 2 to global impact, that's quite a big, extraordinary thing. So can you talk us through what does that look like at the moment, and what are you focused on as you expand?
Yeah, I mean it's very exciting, and when we started with 2 boats, and now we've got lots going on, and we started with 2 people. When we started those 2 boats, there were 2 people in one little borrowed office. Now in New Zealand we've got 10, and in Canada we've got 3. So there's a good sized team around us now. And so, I mean, that's exciting to be able to kind of scale our capability and to be able to, that's not only about getting bigger, it's also about expanding, kind of vertically integrating, I guess, to pick an old buzzword, to doing more in-house, not to own more of the project and make more money, but actually to control more of the project and drive better outcomes, because these are complex boats. And when you're dealing with a really wide supplier base, it can be quite difficult to confidently do a great job all the time. And we've been really pleased with the outcomes that we've been able to deliver in Auckland. But along the way, we've also become aware of some of the risks that have come along. Some of them have bitten us, some of them haven't, but they're there nonetheless. And so we're really, very conscious at looking at the risks that haven't bitten us and contemplating the fact that they might in the future and how to cut them off at the pass. But yeah, I mean, I guess we are fortunate. We've got a couple of quite exciting projects. We've got one in Australia and 2 in America at the moment that are sort of right on the drawing board. And these are big projects for a little company, and so it's both good and bad. We don't need a huge amount of work to be viable, and that's a really nice place to be. We can grow well and be profitable and sustain and improve what we do and develop our people with a relatively small number of projects, which is good because we are operating in a somewhat political environment. Climate action is not as, it doesn't have the bipartisan support that it did 3 or 4 years ago in New Zealand or anywhere around the world. And spending priorities shift around all the time, from climate action to defence. Maybe they'll go back to climate action. Who knows? They're going to need to. But we'd love more of this stuff to happen. But actually, it's a good place for us to be right now. It's it's good to walk before you can run. We've had a great opportunity to do that in Auckland, and now really start to get into a bit of jogging on some more projects. But we're cautious to make sure that we only take on projects that we know we can deliver really well. And right at the moment, we've got a really solid project load for that. And I'm really, really excited about where we're going as a business.
You've obviously talked about Auckland Transport quite a lot, and currently Auckland Transport board chair has said that it comes down to dollars, right? And also we've heard that, in the public settings, do they buy the diesel ferries back? And there's quite a bit of demand going on there. In terms of someone looking at this and what you're promoting, what do you think the real contradiction here is? Because we're hearing support from one end, you're getting funded, and then close to home, this is going on. What's going on, and what lens should a viewer be looking at this from?
Gosh, I mean, look, there's a few things there. I think that in the big picture, we've got to accept that change is never linear, right? And we take 6 steps forward, and occasionally we'll take 3 steps back. But make no mistake, this is 3 steps back, and it doesn't make sense. And in the overall picture, it's a result of local and central government not being joined up. If we look at the diesel ferries operating in Auckland, if we look at the vessels that Auckland Transport, the diesel ones that they're currently talking about procuring, we've talked already about the economics of electric versus diesel. And back before we had an oil crisis, the numbers on the ferries mapped out attractively enough. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme for anybody, but it was okay. But there was this challenge with the shoreside infrastructure cost. That if oil price stayed what it is or got worse, and I know the banks are talking about what happens if it gets a lot worse, then that's going to become quite compelling quite fast. But there's a whole other economic story that is being conveniently forgotten here. If we look at central government's own guidelines on how to monetize costs and benefits or impacts and benefits in the transport sector, they put a dollar value on the cost to the economy of nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides that are released from internal combustion. And if you quantify the cost to the economy of these diesel boats operating, it's about $13 million a year per boat. And Auckland Transport, for whatever reason, seems not to be able to account for that in their business case modelling for buying these diesel boats. And if they did, the conversation about diesel boats would not last more than 5 minutes. So instead, what ought to be able to happen here is Auckland Transport should be able to go to central government and say, hey, we're thinking about building these diesel boats, but they're going to cost you, the taxpayer, through the health system, $13 million a year each. We could build electric ones. If you helped us out with that, it would save you a whole lot of money. That conversation seems not to be happening, and I think that's a great shame.
For you, in the work that you do, I'm sure you're constantly being bombarded with this type of thing. Now, how do you manage those value system for yourself and, the financial side of things? Have you ever been in a position where you've had to take a call on something but still stick to your own values?
This is maybe not the best example, but it's an interesting example. It's maybe a little bit of an engineer's example, but it's the one that springs to mind. When we set about developing the boats that we proactively designed, from which the Auckland boats had been built, the design from which those boats have been built, we chose to build them out of carbon fibre. And we did them out of carbon fibre because that saved about 12 tonnes in the weight of building the boat, which compensated for the weights of the batteries and enabled those boats to be a lot more efficient. And that efficiency enabled us to use smaller batteries and smaller motors and smaller power electronics, and drove a couple of things. It made those boats, pretty much covered the cost of the higher cost of manufacture from the savings in the system. It produced boats that lasted twice as long, but it also enabled those boats to work. It enabled them to do the service we aspired to for them. Now, as a business, we probably would have sold lots more of them if we had built them in aluminium and just not tried going after the hard routes. If we'd just gone looking at the short cross-harbour routes, I think we would have sold lots of them, and lots of people would have come knocking on our door saying, those are great, let's have some more. But for me, that defeated the purpose. Because if you look at where the emissions are made in public transport systems with ferries, they're in the long, fast routes. Electrifying the boats that go across the harbour looks nice on the annual report, and the CEO or the chairman can stand up and say, hey, we've got this electric ferry and we painted it green to show it. And that's great. But the one that moves the dial is the one that can do the long, fast routes, because that's where the real energy is consumed and where the real emissions come from. And to do that, you have to do everything you possibly can to improve the efficiency, chase the efficiency of these boats, and deliver something that really works cohesively. So, as a result, though, we've got this wonderful design of these carbon fibre boats, and people see carbon fibre as being a little bit scary and hard to relate to, and so we're not, we are selling other carbon fibre boats, but we're not. We haven't got the reach through that design that we might otherwise have achieved had they been aluminium. But it's a much better boat than it would have been if it was aluminium. So
it's definitely a positive story. In terms of your own personal values that you live by, what are 3 things that anchor you, and why are those values important to you?
One of them is doing what you say you're going to do. Just delivering on your promise, and recognizing that somebody I used to work with said once, you only get one name in this world. And there were 2 outtakes from that. One of them is, don't let somebody else mess it up. But the other one is, make sure you use it well as well. It's easy to take the easy way out. But I think of another sailing quote from Paul Elvstrom, who was a very famous Scandinavian Olympian, said once, if and it was in relation to cheating, and he said, if I have to cheat to win, if I can't win without earning the respect of my competitors, then it's not worth doing. And I think it's the same thing. I think so. Doing the right thing, being ethical, and being honest, I think is really important. I think that I mentioned being a good ancestor. I think doing what you're making your children proud is sounds kind of sounds pithy, but it's actually really important. And I think the other thing is looking after your team. And I can't always keep everybody happy all of the time, but I sure as heck try.
Thank you, Michael. If anyone wants to follow you, where can they find you?
Well, they can follow me mostly on LinkedIn is where I'm active. So Michael Eaglen from EV Maritime. Can't miss me. So yeah, love to see people there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation, Michael. It's been very insightful, and thank you for sharing it so honestly.
Thanks, Azura. Appreciate the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and got as much out of it as I did. As always, if this episode speaks to you, please like, share, and subscribe to Care Beyond Profits. I appreciate you, and until next time, keep caring beyond profits.